Okie dokie. Right, data strategy and individual giving fundraising, our topic for today. This is a bit of a tricky one, actually. When I first started writing this, I was like, oh, normally I'm doing benchmarking and trends. There's statistics to report on or things that we've seen that have happened. And with this area, it's a little bit more theoretical and a bit less tangible. So what we've tried to do today is to have a think about what would be relevant for you and interesting, and then to make it as tangible as we could. So we've given you lots of kind of visuals and a supported sort of chart to follow, along with some examples of what a hypothetical charity would do in those situations to use things. So hopefully that's going to help you make it a little bit clearer and easier to follow. First things first, we thought probably a good thing to do is to define what data strategy is within the confines of charity fundraising and our perspective of it for today. All strategies really are focused on achieving goals and objectives. They're usually plans or approaches of how we're going to get somewhere, whatever that may be. And data strategy can be interpreted in slightly different ways. I think for more data tech companies, it will focus more heavily on gathering data, storing data, and managing and using data. Really, for us today, we're thinking more, I guess, in a marketing, CRM, fundraising perspective, and thinking about how a data strategy really is defined in helping you unlock the value of your data and insights to help you reach your wider goals and objectives. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail just to help clarify. So your charity will have a mission. It will have things that it's trying to achieve and a goal that it's trying to aim for on a wider level. Within that, there will be fundraising objectives and goals that will be guided towards helping the charity achieve its mission. Within that, there'll be individual giving objectives and goals as part of the overall fundraising. And there you're kind of starting to think more, I guess, about income generation primarily. And that's really where, in my view, a data strategy fits. It's maybe wider, it may be wider than fundraising, but for the purpose of today, a data strategy within individual giving fundraising is about helping you use data to achieve the goals and objectives. So as part of that, I've narrowed down some key elements that I think make up, in my view, a data strategy for individual giving fundraising. And we're going to talk about each of these little bits in more detail. So, but just to run through, understanding the objectives. We'll then go on to understanding information, data and analysis that will be needed. We'll have a quick think about data collection, storage and management, because it's very important. But then going on to how we actually start to understand and use our data, knowing our supporters, segmentation, supporter journey asks and acquisition and retention as part of that, and then creative message, content and channel. Around the outside, you'll see testing, tracking, analysis and insight, and that's something really that encompasses all of this and will become a bit of a kind of ongoing theme that we'll talk a bit more about as well. So, to start with the first point, understanding our objectives. So we have fundraising individual giving objectives. We know we're trying to achieve something, probably income generation will be a large part of that. And the charity that we're going to be using as our kind of example for today had a specific goal around increasing the lifetime value from new and existing supporters. I've given the fundraising hierarchy there. You know, reality is it's never that linear, we know, but helps to maybe structure this, this objective that we're talking about today, which is if we're trying to generate more lifetime value from new and existing, we're trying to move people up the hierarchy. So building relationships with them and then retaining them and gradually developing those relationships so that we can move them on to potentially major donors, legacies one day, regular gifts, and obviously multiple one-off gifts, so that we're not just bringing them in and losing them again. We're actually generating lifetime value from our supporter base. The key thing our charity realised, once it had understood exactly what its objective was, is that it needed to be able to answer key questions around that. They didn't really know what drove engagement and loyalty. So what did they need to know to answer that question? what information did they need to be able to put in place strategies and campaigns and fundraising programs to drive engagement and loyalty to bring up lifetime value from its new and existing supporters. And it realised that in order to answer those questions, it needed to probably gather some data, look at that data, and do some data analysis to enable them to answer them. As part of that process, it had to think about the data that it needed. So that would come from supporter data that it currently had, transactional data, personal data, and then also thinking about what other data it might need. So potentially profiling data, socio-demographic data, or motivational data, what inspired people, what motivated people, starting to bring in other data to top up what they already had to be able to do the analysis that they wanted to do. As part of that, it needs to be thought about the management of that data. So if you have data already, how are you storing it? And if you're gathering extra data, again, how are you storing that data? You need a system that's fit for purpose, that you can store data in safely and cleanly, and that you can update and you can refresh. And also that you can track and monitor what you're doing with the data. So when you mail something out or you email something, you are tracking that and storing that information so that you can see over time what you've done and what's worked and what's not. And of course, within all of that, thinking about the legal, compliant and best practice approach, and making sure you have processes for all of that, that you're storing the data safely, that you're capturing preferences, storing those, etc., and governing that ongoing. So our charity had a goal. It understood that it needed more information to be able to put in place programs and campaigns to start delivering on those objectives. So this is where the analysis really starts to kick in, and you are starting to understand and use your data to deliver insights that you can then take forward into your campaigns and programs and move towards achieving your goals and objectives. The first thing that was really important was knowing the supporters for our charity. So they had lots of people on their database, but they didn't really know an awful lot about them. So they had some raffle players and some cash appeal responders. Some were active, some had lapsed. They had some regular givers, but they didn't really know an awful lot about where these people had come from. They knew their that face-to-face seemed to work for their regular giving, but attrition seemed quite high. People didn't seem to stay around and they weren't sure why. They had a lot of overlap between raffle and cash, but again, they weren't too sure what that overlap meant. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Where had they come from and why was there overlap? And they didn't really know what these groups of people looked like. Who were their supporters? Were they all very mature? Were they younger? Were there, a mix of them? Did younger people tend to do regular giving, or was it actually just mature people came in on their direct mail acquisition channels and not on the others? All of these things they had some ideas and some thoughts about, but they didn't really know. And that's a really important thing as part of your data strategy, is to know that information, to understand who your supporters are and what they're doing on a transactional level, but also a little bit more if you can. So maybe starting to understand things that they're interested in, what motivates them to give to you as a charity, the number of asks they've had, what they've responded to, and maybe socio-demographic as well. Is there anything else there that you can append to your data or know about your data around what people look like and the different audiences within it? So for our charity, they did a couple of analysis projects. They first of all did an internal analysis insights project where they looked at their activity over time and understood who had received what and what worked and what didn't, and time frames and channels that seemed to work. Thinking about who had come in on a cash, how often they played, on a raffle, sorry, how often they played, who'd come in on an emergency appeal online, and what else they went on to do and what seemed to motivate them. All of these things, they started to gather the information so that they had a better sense of what their supporters looked like and what they had done. They also did a profiling exercise where they appended socio-demographic information, and from there they could start to build what they call pen portraits or personas, and they realized that they had 3 or 4 key types of people on their database, which tended to also kind of relate to the products that they were offering. The regular givers looked a bit younger, more family-based, more affluent. The typical profile of their say raffle players or cash tended to be more mature and DM focused. And from there, they could start to get a feel for the best way to talk to people. Using that information, they could start to segment their data if they wanted to. So they had different things that they could do with their data. Now they had personas, so there was groups of types of people within their supporter base that they could select by, or they could select by product. So for example, the segmentation we've got here is a raffle segmentation. You can look at whether recency and value, whether people played lots or not so much, or whether they'd given to a cash appeal and then you know, and how often they did it over time. You can start to select and target people based on their transactional or their interest area or their persona. And by this way, you can start to think about who you're talking to and when. And this ties in very closely with the supporter journeys and asks, and then again, acquisition and retention, really. So you can start to use this information to understand when and what and why is the best time to ask, and how to communicate with your supporters to build and develop relationships with them. You're knowing who you're talking to a bit more, so you can think about what channel you're using or what type of ask you're giving them. You can thank them and acknowledge them and understand if that works and whether that's a good thing to do. And you can also think about non-financial asks and when to share information on what their income to you has helped you achieve, and what works and what doesn't in developing a lifetime value, a lifetime relationship with this supporter. And then, of course, you start to put this into practice a little bit more. So for our charity, they know what they're trying to achieve, and they know the types of people that they're talking to now, and what they're asking to do. They can select and they can segment. So at this point, you can start to use all this information to actually drive the content, the creative themes for all the supporter journey touch points and asks that you're doing. And you can also start to get more personalized. You can talk to somebody and know a little bit more about them and try to make it more relevant for them, also by the channel, but you know, by the content of what it is that you're saying as well. The more you can do that, the more it should resonate with the person you're talking to, and therefore they're more likely to respond and engage with you. And you can start to build that two-way relationship a little bit more. Finally, an important one, you know, we can see our yellow bubbles around the outside there, analysis and insights. We've probably done quite a bit at the beginning, maybe, of this project to understand who our supporters are and to start to segment our database and to use the information to drive the content and the creative. But at this point, it becomes an ongoing iterative process. It's really important that whatever you do, you can track and you can monitor, you can report, and you can understand what's worked and what's not. And also then demonstrate, you know, the impact of perhaps this new approach that you've taken to your stakeholders, your trustees, to show that what you're doing is working and that it's a good way to fundraise. And of course, test everything all of the time. Be careful with your control cells and make sure that you can really understand the impact of whatever test it is that you're trying to do. But then take that data and that insights and feed it back into what you're doing so that you're always learning, always moving forward, always progressing with the strategy and the data that you've got. So just to summarize there, why is having a data strategy important? So for our charity, the goal was relationship and increased engagement with new and existing supporters to encourage loyalty and lifetime value. So the data strategy basically helped a charity move towards a more data and insight driven and therefore supporter centric approach, which meant that they could, and you'll recognise this, select the right supporter segments for the right product at the right time, the right message, and using the right media, but all in a way that could be fully tracked, reported, and analysed upon. And more importantly as well, not only are you then building a relationship with the supporter that is mutually beneficial, you know, they're receiving relevant, engaging asks and pieces of information that will build their trust in you and their support for you, but then in return, they're more likely to give to you and generate a longer lifetime value. So it's a win-win situation. And it does also mean that you're not wasting money as well. There's obviously a cost effectiveness to all of this. The more targeted and relevant you are, the higher the response rates, the higher the gifts, the longer the supporter will stay with you. So you're minimizing blanket mailings, duplication, bad data, bad press. You know, you're minimizing all of those risks and downsides and just maximizing, hopefully, the relationship and the effectiveness of your fundraising with your supporter. Just to kind of expand that out. So obviously that's sort of part of what I do here, along with insight projects for our clients. So if any of this is of interest or you'd like to understand a little bit more about it, these are quite short sessions. So it's just to give you a top level view and to help guide and lead. So if you want to talk about any of these elements here, please do give us a shout. Our email's on the slide in a second, and we can go into deeper dives with you and think about how we can help you a little bit more. That's our email there, charities@woodsvalldata.co.uk.